Welcome to this Tank Encyclopedia video on German light tanks of the Second World War, Part 1. Feel free to leave a like and subscription, as well as checking out our website for the full written article this video is based on, and countless others. After its defeat during the First World War, the German Empire found itself in a state of complete political and economical chaos. With the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, the Germans were forced to give up on parts of its territory and pay a huge war reparations to the Allies. In addition, the vital economical area of the Rhineland was put under the direct control of Belgium, France, and Britain. Emperor Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate and the monarchy was abolished. A new constituent assembly was held in the city of Weimar after the war with the aim of creating a new democratic state, creating the Weimar Republic 1919 to 1933. The new government was plagued with civil unrest, economical crisis, and inflation, the rise of political extremes, and conflicts with the military from the onset. In 1920, in the city of Munich, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, more generally known as the Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, was formed. While initially a quite small political party, it quickly gained a lot of support from citizens dissatisfied with the current political and economic situation. With the support of a well-known former soldier and political figure, Paul von Hindenburg, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. The Enabling Act, signed in March, granted Hitler plenary powers, and from this point on, Adolf Hitler became the de facto dictator of Germany. He further consolidated his power after President Hindenburg died, and took over his presidential position, in addition to his position as Chancellor. The army of the new German Weimar Republic was severely limited in overall size to only 100,000 men. In addition, development of new military technology such as aircraft or tanks was specifically banned by the Treaty of Versailles. This did not prevent the Germans from actually undertaking the development of such projects under great secrecy. Unfortunately for them, in the years after World War I, the political and economical situation in Germany was in a state of complete chaos, so no such work could be achieved at that time, even when not considering the treaty limitations. By the late 20s, the overall situation normalized enough to begin the development of tanks. For this reason, the German army officials issued a request for the development of two tank designs. This would eventually evolve into the Leichttraktor, or light tractor, armed with a 3.7 cm main gun, and the Großtraktor, or large tractor, armed with a larger 7.5 cm gun. This work was entrusted to some of the best German manufacturers at that time, Krupp, Rheinmetall, and Daimler-Benz. However, these companies lacked the experience and knowledge on designing and building such vehicle, so they were forced to learn by trial and error. At that time, the Soviets were also trying to develop their own tank projects. Thus, Germany and the Army of the Soviet Union found common ground and began working on a joint operation of testing and developing such vehicles. Together, they secretly constructed a tank test facility at Kazan in the Soviet Union. There, during the early 30s, the Germans tested their prototypes under various conditions. Ultimately, once Hitler came to power in Germany, this cooperation was shut down. While the Leichttraktor and the Großtraktor proved to be unreliable and unproven designs, they gave German engineers vital experience and learning in tank design. From this point onward, the Germans would begin working on other projects which would eventually lead to the creation of a later highly successful tank design. Today, in the popular mythos, the German army from the Second World War is strongly tied to the concept of lightning war and the mass use of tanks. However, many German military officials during the early tank development period actually did not believe that this had any real combat potential. If this view of the use of tanks had prevailed, the Germans would have probably used their tanks like most other nations, as infantry support weapons. However, there were also visionaries that saw that tanks and other armored vehicles had the power to change how modern warfare was fought. One such person was Heinz Guderian, who is best known today as the father of the German tank units. Based on his personal experience during the First World War, he theorized that highly mobile and concentrated armored units had a much better chance of piercing the enemy front line, creating havoc and panic in the enemy's rear. He had been fighting for his new concept since 1929. The following year, he was appointed commander of the Kraftfahrabteilung III, a Prussian military unit consisting of 4 companies, stationed in Berlin. Due to the Versailles Treaty restrictions, this unit had only a few older armored cars available. In order to test his ideas and conduct initial crew training, Guderian ordered that dummy tanks based on cars be built and used. In 1931, Guderian would receive a huge boost of support when he was appointed as assistant to Oberst Oswald Lutz, who was also open to new ideas. Together, they participated in a series of dummy tank exercises which would prove vital in later formation of the 1st Panzer Divisions. They also received more support once Adolf Hitler came to power, as the army received an increased budget and the Treaty of Versailles was officially disregarded. Their previous vehicles were all unsuited for mass production and had a number of mechanical issues. One of these regarded their engines, which produced very high torque at low speeds and forced the Germans to use heavier drives than otherwise needed. The suspension had a complicated design. The protection was thin, among other issues. It was obvious to the Germans that these were not the designs that they were searching for. The leading German tank development advocates, Generalmajor Oswald Lutz and his chief of staff, Oberstleutnant Heinz Guderian, essentially urged for the development of 2 tank designs. One would be armed with a 5 cm gun intended to fulfill the anti-tank role, while the second vehicle would be armed with a larger 7.5 cm gun, with the intention of providing fire support. Given the overall slow development, a temporary solution that could be quickly and cheaply implemented was needed. The first Panzer operated by the Germans in great numbers was the Panzer I. It was a Krupp-designed vehicle that was initially designated as a Landwirtschaftlicher Schlepper LS, essentially agricultural tractor, once again to hide its original purpose. To help spread the experience in production and working with tanks, Krupp, MAN, Daimler-Benz, Henschel, and Rheinmetall Borsig were to each produce 3 prototype vehicles. No upper armored superstructure nor turret was added on these 15 vehicles, as their primary purpose was to serve as training and test vehicles. Following the completion of the small production series of the LS, it was modified by receiving an upper protective superstructure and a small one-man turret armed with 2 machine guns. It was put into production in 1934, which lasted up to 1936, with 1,075 such vehicles being built. While it was initially designated as MG Panzerwagen, machine gun armored vehicle, the name was changed in 1938 into the better-known Panzerkampfwagen I aus A. As the Panzer I aus A began entering service, the Krupp engine proved to be unreliable and prone to overheating. So, a new version was developed incorporating a longer chassis with a more advanced Maybach engine and a new suspension with 5 road wheels instead of 4. The production of the Aus B began in August 1935 and ended in May or June 1937, with less than 400 vehicles being built. During the war, the Panzer I chassis was used for a variety of different roles. One of the first modifications was the Panzerkampfwagen I aus B ohne Aufbau. This version had its superstructure and turret removed to make room for carrying equipment and spare parts. This version was tasked to support the maintenance and repairs of fully armed Panzer I vehicles. Given that they performed unsatisfactorily in this role, they would be solely allocated instead for crew training. Given the obvious shortcoming of the previous Panzer Is, in May 1936 the Germans started to slowly introduce a new improved Panzer II, initially known as the 2 cm MG Panzerwagen, into production. The new vehicle had a crew of 3 and had a more powerful armament consisting of 1 2 cm cannon and 1 machine gun. The armor was initially quite similar to the Panzer I. With further development and the introduction of new versions of the Panzer II, its overall armor thickness would be improved too. The naming of the Panzer II versions may be somewhat confusing. The first pre-production series, which was to be used for experimentation and evaluation, was built in 3 smaller series, each with 25 vehicles, named A/1, A/2, and A/3. This was followed by the Aus B, which was built in slightly greater numbers. The 2 versions were distinguishable from the later ones by incorporating 6 smaller road wheels placed in pairs and suspended using leaf spring units. While these 2 series were mainly experimental in nature, due to a lack of tanks, they would see action in places like Poland during the initial stages of the war. The third version was the Aus J, which was later divided into A, B, and C subversion. These incorporated a slightly improved armor protection, 40.5mm compared to the previous 13mm, a new 5-wheel leaf spring suspension, improved transmission, etc. This was a standard production version that was built in larger numbers, with some 1,033 being built. While initially the Panzer II was mainly produced by MAN, later new manufacturers were also included, such as Henschel, Alket, and Famo, among others. During 1938, new versions of the Panzer II, the Ausf D and A, were developed and adopted for service. They had the same armament and turret, but with a modified superstructure and, most importantly, a new torsion bar suspension that ran on 4 larger road wheels without any return rollers. While the Panzer II Ausf D and A did see combat action in Poland, due to their poor performance, less than 50 vehicles would be built. The Ausf F was the last major production version of the Panzer II. It received a number of improvements, such as increasing frontal armor thickness to 35mm and having a modified superstructure. Slightly less than 500 would be built before production stopped at the end of 1942. By 1942, due to attrition and obsolescence, Panzer II numbers began to dwindle, and the surviving vehicles were reused for other purposes, most notably for self-propelled artillery, the so-called Wespe, and anti-tank vehicles of the Martyr II series. This concludes Tank Encyclopedia's video on the German light tanks of the Second World War Part 1. We hope you liked it. Don't forget to check our website and our Patreon. And until next time, keep us in your sights.